With that, I'm very happy to introduce a colleague and friend, Dustin. He's a principal architect at Google, and he is going to talk to you about Gemini 3 today with a specific context of why it is so useful for scientific and technical computing. Dustin, thanks for joining us.
Very good. Thank you, Jay. I really appreciate that. So I'm truly excited to be here today. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. And when Jay had asked about talking about some of the new capabilities of Gemini, I was thinking, all right, maybe I'll have 3 or 4 hours or so, because there's so much to share. Have a little bit of whiteboard that we'll go through, and then we'll jump into demos. Not much of a slides guy myself, but happy to do some demos and whiteboarding. So before we jump into things, if you're not familiar, Gemini 3 is our state-of-the-art frontier model, and version 3.0, which was introduced towards the end of last year, was a step change between the models before it. And I like to think of it this way, whereas Gemini 1.5 was more about the context window, that big million token context window that you'd pass into it. Then we kind of evolved to Gemini 2 and Gemini 2.5, which was a lot about multimodality. Gemini 3 is truly a step change where there's this shift to reasoning and agency. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means. But in my mind, if you've ever read Thinking Fast and Slow by Dean Kamen, where he talks about System 1 thinking versus System 2 thinking, that really resonates with me in respect to Gemini 3. So instead of prior models would be given a prompt, and they would basically do next token prediction. And that would be what you get. Gemini 3 still does next token prediction, but it'll take that prompt and break it down into subsections. And it'll accomplish the first part of that section, and then it'll think about it, and it'll reason about it. Maybe it'll sort over, but then it'll use that to go to the next section, and then the next section, and then ultimately the response will come back to you. So it thinks and decides in a multi-step process before it gives you the results, and we'll go through that. But before we jump into a demo, I want to switch over to my whiteboard because there's something that's really important to understand, especially when we start looking at some of the demos. So, I had mentioned that Gemini is our state-of-the-art frontier model. There's many, many ways of accessing Gemini. And it's good to see this visually because then you'll help to understand what you're looking at. So you can access Gemini over what we call the Gemini app. So that's gemini.google.com, and anyone can access that just in a normal web browser. If you're a hobbyist or a developer, there's AI Studio.google.com that you can access with your Gmail account. And we'll show a demo of that. But if you want to build out an app and play around with all the various permutations of Gemini, you can leverage AI Studio. Businesses and organizations leverage Vertex AI through GCP. So if you're an organization that wants to stand up an entire infrastructure to train and tune models and upload data, and do that in a secure way, you can leverage it through Vertex. We'll take a look at that as well. And then you might have seen there's the Gemini CLI that you can leverage from your command prompt. And the list goes on and on. There's anti-gravity, which is our agent-based IDE for building out applications. And then, of course, you might have seen it show up in search as well through AI overviews. But all of these interfaces, if you will leverage Gemini. But it's more than just Gemini, because we have many, many versions of Gemini, but then also other models. So there's VO for generating videos. There's image gen for generating images. And there's also Nano Banana, and we'll talk about that in a second. But then we also have embeddings models. So if you wanted to create your own embeddings, and there's many of those that you can also leverage, and many other models. But the reason why I wanted to draw it out like this is because there are 3 really important announcements or features, if you will, that was made available in the Gemini 3.0 release that we'll talk about. That if you want to log off of this afterwards and go do some more research, I would say 3 pretty groundbreaking capabilities have been released in Gemini 3.0. And we'll take a look at those, I think, that are very applicable to y'all. One would be thinking levels. So this is essentially telling the model how deep to think about the prompt that you give it. And in just a second, we'll ask Gemini the same prompt using different thinking levels so you can see how it behaves differently. Another very important capability is called dynamic routing. And essentially what happens with this is when you were to give Gemini a prompt, there's a little layer that happens right in the beginning where Gemini will think about that prompt and then either answer it directly, or maybe it'll pass it off to the appropriate model to help it come to that answer behind the scenes. This last bit we'll talk about is called the thought signature. Jay and I were talking before we hopped on about the interest in agents, and we'll talk about that in a second. But when Gemini leverages multiple tools or agents to accomplish its task, thought signature is used to maintain state as it communicates with all those various tools. So all that to say, you can see the vast platform that's there. Me and my colleagues, we typically talk about Vertex AI over a multi-hour session. AI Studio, there's a lot there, and of course, anti-gravity is really catching a lot of momentum. So we could talk about each of those for hours, but let's take a quick look at AI Studio, and then we'll take a look at Vertex AI. I'm going to share my screen. So the important thing about this is that with just a Gmail account, you can leverage aistudio.google.com. And one reason why I like AI Studio is a lot of the frontier, cutting edge stuff, new features will first surface in AI Studio. And then everyone can leverage this to build apps or to chat with all the models. So if you log into AI Studio, I can say chat with models. And over on the right-hand side, we'll see we can choose which model that we would like to access. There's the Gemini 3 Pro models. There's Nano Banana, which is the image generation. There's various versions of Gemini. But I can do other things too. I can give it the system instructions. So this essentially will tell the model how to interact with you in a certain tone or a style. I saw a funny one the other day where someone had asked the models to explain everything to them as if they were a dog. That was pretty creative. So there's also the temperature setting, which essentially tells the model how creative to be in that next token prediction. Media resolution is what type of images to, or how fine grain of an image to create. And then here's that thinking level that I talked about just a second ago. So, here's a good example of that thinking level. So if I were to say hi on this thinking level, and then I'm going to ask the pro model to solve for the base integers given these particular formulas. So I'm just going to hit run because the point isn't really what it comes back with. The point is on this thinking level to show you that how it's breaking down that particular problem. It's determining, the divisibility criteria of it, determining, the base of what it should be coming up with. It's concluding the bases and then verifying, right? So the model is stepping back and determining if what it came to was correct. And then after it comes to that, now it formulates the answer and gives the answer to you. But if I were to say I'm going to ask this same question in low, give it that same prompt, I'll run it again, and again the answer isn't really the point in this case. But notice how it behaved very differently in that case. And notice if we expand this out, it's a lot shorter, right? The reason I show you that is because depending on the level of accuracy or detail that you need, inside the 3.0 models, you can adjust that thinking level to be low or high. And this really comes into play when we start looking at our agents that are doing mathematical reasoning and finding a new material, for instance. But another quick feature is, let's say you have a document that you would like to interact with Gemini to ask questions of that document. Here I have a research paper that I'm going to attach to this prompt. And it's essentially about liquid copper. And I have a question that I'm going to ask it. So looking at this document, I'm essentially going to ask it to explain some various things within that document. So I'm going to hit go, and it's going to think. And of course we have a live error. But what will happen is on that one, it will correlate. Maybe it's because I ran this prior, but it'll correlate up the information that's on a particular page about thermoanalysis with a chart that's on another page to come up to that answer that I've asked it to verify that particular experiment across different pieces of that paper. But the reason why I wanted to show this is because, again, if you are an application developer or a hobbyist that are building applications that would sit on top of the model, you can build out that prompt, specify all the configurations of that prompt, and then say get code. And now inside this code, you can take and copy this into the application that you're building. Maybe you're building a user interface that allows people to upload documents, or maybe it connects to a database. But you can then take this code and then build out your application that leverages everything that you configure with inside the UI. Something I like to do quite a bit is to build this out and then open it up in Collab. And then I can really start to play around with all the parameters and connect to various data sources. But it's a really good way, again, if you're a builder or hobbyist, to build out an app and then get up and running really quickly. A couple of other things to mention. You can enable grounding with search. So if you just want to upload documents to it and not have it go out to the internet to ground on it, very, very powerful feature. Or if you wanted to ground on a particular URL that you could give it, you can enable that and input your URL. So the reason why I wanted to show that is, again, it's something that that just anybody can leverage. But what if you are an organization, a company? So with that, we can leverage Vertex AI, and let me log in here. All right, so if you are an organization, I work a lot with the Department of Energy, and they need a secure way to access the models with their data that is not publicly accessible. They also would like to take and connect and ground Gemini to their internal sources of data. So imagine, go back to this. Imagine you had Gemini running again with inside your secure environment, but you wanted to connect this to a database that's within inside your organization, or maybe you wanted to ground it on a repository of research papers, or maybe you have an internal website that you would like to ground those prompts on. That is what Gemini Enterprise allows you to do. So here is Gemini Enterprise, which is sitting on top of Gemini. But notice there's this little, I guess, database icon here that I can click on. And you see we have several connectors. So when I ask it a question, I can ground on my internal data set, my internal calendar, my internal drive. There's about, say, a little over 100 various connectors. So we can ground on Slack or Jira or Confluence or SharePoint, Office 365, your internal Google Drive documents and calendars and folders. We use this a lot internally at Google. There are many internal repositories of information at Google, everything from our internal discussions or product announcements or the bug database that we have, or a lot of people's Drive folders have really good nuggets of information. But with inside Gemini Enterprise, I can essentially ask it a prompt, and then it would ground upon data that it is connected to. At the Department of Energy, like, we would use it for different folks to upload research papers or documents that they have internally and ask questions against that data. A couple of other things that are here as well are the agents. So we ship a couple of agents out of the box, one being deep research. So imagine if I were to ask deep research, what are the ways of generating clean energy? What deep research will do is it'll formulate a plan and start browsing the web or internal repositories for data and information that are related to clean energy. It'll come back. Sometimes this will take, 5 minutes, sometimes 10 minutes. I've even seen it take longer as it really reaches out into all the nooks and crannies of all the data sources that it's connected to. So imagine it's doing just that. It's doing that deep research, looking to places that I wouldn't know of where to go to. But yeah, so this can take a little bit of time. So I'll kick it off. But so here, just based upon that prompt, it's going to come up with a research plan, going to figure out where it needs to go to. I can look through that. Maybe I can add some other sources, but I can just interact with it back and forth to change this plan, or I could hit start research. And then it'll go off doing all that and come back to me with what it finds. So a little bit different than that is idea generation. So this is, I'm going to ask you to come up with new and novel ideas for generating clean energy, right? So very different, not just do that research, but come up with new and novel ideas. This is very fun. We could spend hours on this alone. And I've kicked one off previously. This one took about 45 minutes, but it's very different. So here, I asked it to find renewable energy sources. So when I gave it that goal, it went out and came up with 75 ideas. It took about 45 minutes. But behind the scenes, a lot happens. One, it determines what the goal is that I'm trying to ask it. And then it determines some requirements of those ideas. And then it defines attributes. Things like, what's the source of the energy? Is it a new and novel idea that's already out there? How feasible is it? Is there technical readiness to implement this idea? What's the potential impact of this idea? So what happens is behind the scenes, we spin up copies of Gemini, a combination of Flash and Pro, and they all go out and come up with these ideas. When they come back, they're assigned an ELO rating. That's basically a way of ranking that idea compared to those attributes that we just took a look at. But here's this. Check this out. Here's this one idea that it came up with, and look at my scroll bar. So this is just one idea. So what happened is a researcher would take this idea and then go off and determine if it's something that they want to prove out, right? So you're working hand in hand with this, with these ideas and these models to come up with new and novel ideas to reach a goal. So a lot going on here with the agents piece. These are agents that we're shipping out of the box, and there's many more to come. There's the co-scientist agent, which you might have heard about, which think of idea generation, but on steroids, right? So now we're grounding it on a data set and using evolutionary computation to come up with ideas over periods of hours or days. There's the ability for your organization or an app developer to build out to build out agents that are grounded on data, and then the whole organization can leverage. Or there's ability for non-technical people to build out agents. So for instance, I could go up here and say, looking at my calendar, build out my annual performance review. but I might want to connect it to a whole bunch of other data sources too, right? I might say, hey, looking at my drive and my mail and my calendar to see what I did last year, and summarize that in something, and then create a document that I could, maybe pass up to my management. But there's also the agent designer. So if you want to do something a little bit more advanced, I can go in here to the agent designer, give it a name, a description. I could give it instructions to find what model I want to use, and then create sub-agents. So maybe one agent is look at my calendar and my mail to figure out all the things that I've done. And then the next agent is maybe I'm going to put that into a drive or a database, or find the hidden patterns and things that I like to do intrinsically and bubble those up higher, right? So we can break down those discrete tasks that I want to happen. So the point with that is that you can look at Gemini Enterprise as an environment to host and run agents, whether they're from Google, or whether it's from a third party, or you've built your own using something like the Agent Developer Kit, or maybe you built one using the UI. So a lot there. The last one on this is NotebookLM. I think of it more as an application, but it is listed under the agents piece. So this is a little bit different. And imagine Gemini is trained on information that it can glean off the web and other sources. Imagine building a model that is trained and tuned just on your data set, just on data that you give it. And it's yours and yours alone, right? That's what NotebookLM is all about. So I created a notebook here on the DOE Earthshots program, but I've added some PDFs and some YouTube links, but you can add like all different sources of information. But once I've dragged and dropped that data set inside NotebookLM, now I can interact with that content. Because again, it's a model that's built just on this data set. It's not going out to the web, and it's not pulling out information that I don't want it to, right? So you notice I hover over this, it shows where in that corpus of data it got that information and how it answered that. And there's a whole lot that you can do with this. There's audio overviews. I actually use this personally in my personal life, where I can add maybe some research papers that might be contradictory or very deep. But generating the audio overview will create a podcast of two different people that are discussing that paper that I give it. And then I can even interact. I can inject a particular question while the two people are discussing the paper. So if you were to drag over the attention is all you need white paper, it does a fantastic job of talking about how transformers work. And I can jump in and ask certain questions that I might not get. So it's a really great way of understanding content in a modality that I didn't think I would. A lot to discuss. I was talking to Jay that we should really do one on anti-gravity. So hopefully we'll have that one on the docket coming up. But that's an agentic development platform that is sitting on top of this this whole infrastructure, which did lead into there was some discussion coming into this about what's the future and where's all this going? And one thing that I'm deeply excited about. So I even take off my Google hat. I'm very excited about what the 3.0 Gemini 3.0 means in the marketplace. Again, it's a paradigm shift from just doing next token prediction to the thinking levels and dynamic routing, and a model that is able to maintain state across agents on the back end. And the reason why that's important is going back to the diagram on the whiteboard. When you ask Gemini something, it is going to need to pull in the appropriate tools to answer that. For instance, if I were to ask Gemini, what would happen? Actually, you know what? Let's do it. I think we have a little bit of time. But if I could say, what would happen? Let's see. I'll try it. Let's see. Where's the best place? Here, let me do this. I'll ask it with inside Vertex. But if I were to say, what would happen if I flipped over a table where the table is taller than the room is wide? So a lot has to happen there, right? There's a lot, there's a lot going on. So for instance, it's going to need to, it's going to need to figure out the arc of motion. It's going to need to think about the geometry of the table and what it's sitting on. And then it's going to have to look at the results of trying to flip over a table in that unique situation. Oh, right. It's going to need to know about the floor and how well the floor will slide. Exactly. That ability to do dynamic routing on the back end is really critical for the future. And one thing I wanted to leave y'all with is I'd be curious to know, show of hands of who has heard about or looked at world models. That's, very, very exciting from an industry perspective. And we just, recently announced the work that we're doing on Genie 3. Genie 3 is our world model. It's a model that's not based upon text that it's looked at over the web, but it's a model that is based on reality. So the classic example of that is if you have, let's say, VO, and you're asking it to generate a video of somebody bouncing a ball, that model will do it because it's watched millions of models in the past of somebody bouncing a ball. But you might notice maybe sometimes the ball goes a little bit above the hand or a little bit below the hand, or somebody leans on a wall and their hand kind of goes through the wall a little bit, right? It's just a little bit weird. That's because it doesn't understand why the ball bounces. It doesn't understand physics and air pressure and gravity and force and equal and opposite forces acting upon one another, right? But world models do. It's three-dimensional worlds that are reasoned on spatial and temporal data sets, right? So it understands space and time, and again, physics. So the reason why I highlight that is because if I were to, might try to log out and log back into the AI Studio, but if I were to look at things like this, where here I'm, I have a particular three-dimensional piece of art, I go and I break it. All of those individual pieces that fall down are all built in real time, right? So I can imagine now interacting with a model where I can in real time make it taller or make it larger, or make it sitting on top of a tree or on the ground or what have you. But this is where world models are going to get, or are going to get. So imagine taking these models and they're now embodied into a robot, and it understands space and time in real time. It's coming to that. So the reason why I share this is because, for one, even today, if you were to ask Gemini certain types of questions, it'll use that dynamic routing to route that to the next appropriate model. So let me go to this just to show it off a little bit. If I were to say, generate an image as if I were looking east from the top of the Empire State Building. If I hit go on that, a lot's going to have to happen behind the scenes. It's going to have to think about, okay, well, what does that mean? I'm looking east, but I'm looking east from where? From the top of the Empire State Building. It'll want to consult weather, right, to see, what time it is. At this particular moment in time. It will need to know where the sun is at. It's at the 86th floor, right? There's going to be a recent sunrise, etc. There's the East River over Long Island, right? So it's going to have to leverage all these corpuses of data and other models to generate that type of an image. And that's why I'm so excited about Gemini 3 and things like thinking levels and dynamic routing and thought signature, because it paves the way for the world as our oyster, if you will. As these new models come online, we'll just plug them in. As you build a model that's tuned on your data set, we can route it to that model to do that scientific exploration using data that only you have or only you know about, right? So I'm very, very bullish on what this true paradigm, this transformational shift that 3.0 is announcing. So if you want to play around with Gemini, I encourage you to look at AI Studio or just the Gemini app if you're an organization. Vertex AI is the route I would recommend if you're a developer. Definitely Anti-Gravity. Oh, one thing too I wanted to mention. I'm particularly fascinated with world models. Again, a model that understands spatial reasoning and temporal reasoning. Some really great work being done by others in the industry, particularly Fei Li and World Labs. She's doing some amazing stuff over there. So if you do want to dig into this particular area, hit up worldlabs.ai, and you can really get a feel for where the sense of all this is going. Just one other little tidbit on that. The reason why this is so powerful is because, and Sundar has talked about this, we have versions of Genie, that three-dimensional world model. And then there's versions of Gemini living inside that three-dimensional model, learning in real time. So imagine you're a warehouse and you're building a robotic agent that is able to put stuff on a shelf. Well, now in real time, we can interact with that warehouse, that three-dimensional warehouse, and throw boxes in its place. There's a spill and now it's slippery. The lighting is different. That shelf all of a sudden got moved by a human. That robot needs to learn how to interact and respond to that three-dimensional space. And we can throw all these different scenarios at it, and it can learn and develop very, very quickly, because it's a 3D environment that we can modify all the time. So On that note, we're taking and putting Gemini Robotics on humanoids just for that purpose alone. So again, yeah, as you can see, there's a lot to talk about, and we would love to dive deeper into any of these in the coming weeks, especially anti-gravity and the Gemini CLI. Lots to talk about there in the integration with MCP and A2A and ADK. There's a lot that we can cover there, but I think that's like a good top level. And Jay, I'll hand it over to you to see if there's anything I forgot or anything you want to talk about or mention.
Dustin, that was great. And we really appreciate you doing this. I hope everybody will give Dustin a round of applause. Dustin, that's perfect because while this community has a lot of HPC and other scientific and technical computing users, these AI tools are going to be incredibly useful to all of these people using computing resources. And you talked about how it's useful to the individuals in ideation and deep research and research planning. These tools are also useful in the computations themselves, and we'll cover all aspects of this over the course of this year. In fact, at the workshop on February 19th, for people who can make it to Sunnyvale, California in Silicon Valley for that, we'll have some labs related to using these tools so people can really do hands-on with that. So Dustin, thank you for that. I encourage people to submit questions. I see one in the Q&A now, and I have a couple, Dustin. Oh, don't go off camera, Dustin. We're not done with you yet. We got some questions for you. Bill Turner asks, I have been bringing in different slants and viewpoints, ethics and coding, Dr. Qasim Saleh and others. Does it maintain their influence, or do I need to continue to remind Gemini? Parentheses, I imported his authorization as we are longtime friends. I think what he means, he's been giving context in that context window about ways to view this from an ethics and coding standpoint, and so is asking, does he have to periodically remind it of those positions, or will it retain that over the long haul?
Yeah, great question, actually. So in prior versions of Gemini, we had that million token context window where it tried to maintain a memory of that conversation. Even though 1 million tokens is a lot, there is an opportunity for things to fall off. That is the significance of the thought signature. The thought signature will make, so interestingly enough, Gemini is stateless. A lot of people don't know that. So as you start extending that conversation or calling in tools, it would lose state. And that's what thought signature does. So Gemini 3 should greatly improve the memory of the context that it had over time. But then there's also some ways that you can ground it, putting data inside of a repository as well, and telling it to always consult that.
Yeah,
so a couple different ways of handling that.
If he encodes what he's fed it into a document, he can periodically give it that document and just ensure that it stays grounded in that ethics of coding context. Yep. Great. So I wanted to make a couple of reminders to our audience. Dustin's referenced some things. One of them was anti-gravity. If you haven't heard of it, it's our latest, and it's available freely, downloadable for Windows, Mac, and I think Linux, development environment. And it's a new development environment. I think it shares some commonalities with VS Code, as all IDEs do, but it was really built in the AI era. So that's a free download, right, Dustin? Anyone can download that and use that. Just as Dustin pointed out, with the Gmail account, you can use a lot of these technologies for free. And Dustin and I encourage you to use Gemini and use these tools. Use Claude from Anthropic. Use ChatGPT. Use all of these technologies. Learn the strengths and weaknesses. We're very proud of the ones we've developed, but competition is a good thing. We want you to try out our technologies, try out these others, but increasingly, everybody in the space is building agentic systems that are more powerful. And remember, the age of generative AI is just 3 years, 1 month, and 2 weeks old. So we're really in the early days of it. And yet there's all these cool downloadable tools like our recent anti-gravity. I also want to tell everybody that next week we have a session on Gemini CLI. Dustin drew that on the whiteboard at the beginning as one of the tools that's Gemini powered. If you're a command line interface user, and even if you're not, I encourage you to tune in next week, because next week is going to be a gallery of examples of Gemini CLI. And Dustin, I wanted to ask you if you've got like a favorite example of Gemini CLI that we should include in our maybe in our showcase next week, but is there something you particularly like using it for?
For sure, extending the ability to extend the CLI with MCP servers is something that I'm a huge proponent of. So if I have a repository or a database, or the conical get weather example, if you have a service that you would like to integrate within a prompt, you can simply add that MCP server within the CLI that extends Gemini.
Great. And Dustin, on this world model part, our audience includes scientists, engineers, technical application developers, and that latter group includes, of course, business application developers and whatnot. So we have a very professional audience, of course. These world models, I always think about their value for science and engineering, because instead of learning patterns in text and hoping they get the science right, they're learning actual science, laws of nature behaviors. And so they're much more likely to be useful. Are they also going to be useful in business applications as well?
Oh yeah. So it's there's been a lot discussed on the emergent capabilities of this in ways that we can't even imagine, like international trade and the stock market and things like that we can't even fathom. But I'm particularly excited because we'd had the ability to say, generate a poem for me, right? Or generate a music or what have you on the one side of Gemini. But then on the other side, I could ask it, would this molecule bond with this other molecule under this certain condition, right? So we're filling it out. We're working with the Department of Energy, and they're literally trying to solve nuclear fusion. Asking it, is boron, proton nuclear fusion possible under these circumstances, and how do we handle the molten output of that TOCA environment? So yeah, I'm excited for where it's going, but the unknown emergent capabilities is what has a lot of people excited.
And last question is, you started with AI Studio, which I really liked. When I teach about our tools, I always start with Gemini and then later move to it. I love that you started with that, because I think this audience is one that can embrace that. Can you just sort of summarize real quickly for everybody who's left what the reasons are for trying out AI Studio? As wonderful as the Gemini web interface is, what the reasons are for using the web interface to AI Studio? What are some additional things they can do very easily?
Right. Yeah. If you are a builder, is where I would lead with that. AI Studio gives you the ability to specify system instructions and temperature and the thinking levels and all that. You can upload documents as a part of the prompt, but then inside that environment, you can then get the code to now run inside a Colab environment or to build a user interface onto the front of what you build. In addition, a lot of the models that are coming out are first showing up in AI Studio. So it's a really great place to see the latest and greatest that's happening. So I would say builders, and then people who want to maybe turn the knobs a little bit, is very powerful.
I like pointing out that temperature knob that people can adjust, and turning it up increases the creativity, but also increases the possibility of hallucination, and turning it down gives a little bit colder, stricter answers, but also prevents it from sometimes wandering off on a prompt that might be prone to hallucination.
I love that, Jay. So I look at it from a mathematical perspective. So a little behind the scenes for a lot of people, a lot of these models, for the most part today, are looking at next token prediction. So what's the next likely word to come in a given sentence? And so if I were to say, in the garden were a lot of beautiful blank, with a very creative nature, it might come back and say, in the garden, there are a lot of beautiful rocks. And I thought that was kind of funny, but come to find out, my parents have a rock garden, and that really resonated with them.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I use the peanut butter and blank sandwich one, where of course it's almost always going to say jelly, but occasionally banana. And if you turn that temperature up, it might come up with banana more and other things as well. hopefully not onions, but anyway, Dustin, thank you very much. Give Dustin a round of applause again.